على محمد
على حق الحسن والحسين second time صلوات. على حق فاطمة الزهراء third time louder صلوات.
صل على
بر خوشنودی محمد و آل محمد با آواز بلند صلوات. صل علی محمد و آل محمد.
For your Marhumin and the Marhumin of the rest of the community, please recite a Surah Al-Fatiha مسبوقة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد و آل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Before we begin, if I can have the brothers move closer to the minbar so that others can join us. If you can make sure to not block the door, there's some space over here on the left. If you can move to my left, fill up the spaces. صلوا على محمد وعلى أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وبه نستعين إنه خير ناصر ومعين. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وحجته على الخلق أجمعين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى يوم الدين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إنما وليكم الله ورسوله والذين آمنوا الذين يقيمون الصلاة ويؤتون الزكاة وهم راكعون. ومن يتولى الله ورسوله والذين آمنوا فإن حزب الله هم الغالبون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Dear brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight is the night of Ashura. It is a night that we should all emulate Abu Abdullah and his camp, spend the night in mourning and sadness, spend the night in ibadah and worship of Allah. And in these past few nights that we have been reflecting on the verses of the Quran, we should also spend this night reflecting on our wilayah and our connection to Abu Abdullah and the rest of the Ahlulbayt. It is also a night that we should spend thinking about and contemplating the mission of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And inshallah, in the few moments that we have together, I'd like to just spend talking about and thinking about and ultimately reflecting on how Abu Abdullah al-Hussein's journey towards Karbala was a fulfillment of these verses of Surah Al-Ma'idah. Especially in days that we are going through, in the current events that we are watching on our phones, on our screens, many times it is very easy for us to lose heart, to think that Allah, na'udhu billah, has forsaken us, that He has taken away that hidayah, and He has severed that connection to humankind. And in fact, one of the worst things that we can do as human beings is to feel the sense of hopelessness in the mercy and the compassion of Allah. In other words, our wilayah in Allah is not just a wilayah of authority and Allah's commands, nor is it just a wilayah of love, but it is also a responsibility upon me to have hope in my beloved. Allah loves me, and the more I love Him, the more I see my hope in Him. And also, when I see my hope in Allah, then the more I recognize that Allah is calling each and every one of us in this world to live up to our greatest potential. And each and every one of us human beings, we have a different call. The vocation that I have been placed in, the responsibility that Allah has placed in my life, is different from the responsibility that He has given you. And fulfilling and success, fulfilling that responsibility is the success that Allah has promised to the Hizballah. How much I can live up to and answer the call of God. That is the end of these verses that we've talked about, that sometimes is a question for us. وَمَنْ يَتَوَلَّ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا فَإِنَّ حِزْبَ اللَّهِ هُمُ الْغَالِبُونَ. The people who take as their wali Allah, His Prophet, and الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, those who believe. فَإِنَّ حِزْبَ اللَّهِ هُمُ الْغَالِبُونَ. The party and the faction of Allah, they are the ones who will be victorious. But many times we don't see victory as we expect it. Many times we actually see defeat, and we feel defeated and at a loss. And so where does this ghalaba, this victory and this strength of Allah, where does it fit in our lives, and how do we see it play out? This victory, brothers and sisters, is of two types. One is my ability to succeed and be victorious in answering the call of Allah, in whatever call Allah has placed and given me, whatever vocation that Allah has given me. We're not talking about my job or my career. We're talking about what responsibility I have towards Allah and how well I fulfill that responsibility. And it's in different aspects of my life. Allah calls me to sacrifice for Him. Allah calls me to dedicate my life to Him. And this might present itself in different ways. It is on an individual level, how well I can respond to that call of Allah, how much I can sacrifice and I can give for fulfilling that call, that on an individual level, Allah will consider me amongst the ghalibun. And then there is the outward, the societal and the historical. This is the outward and the superficial ghalaba that many of us consider. On a superficial level, we might have thought that Abu Abdullah al-Hussein had been defeated. But if we think about it in terms of his answering the call of Allah, fulfilling that responsibility that Allah gave him, then and only then will we understand the words of Lady Zainab, alayhi salam, when she says, in the face of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, the tyrant and the governor who had been set as the occupier of the city of Kufa, and to quell the rebellions that were coming up underneath him. After he had massacred Abu Abdullah al-Hussein and his camp, and he had thought that he was successful and victorious on that day, it is a person like Lady Zainab who comes and shows him what true victory and success means. We have heard these words from Lady Zainab. When Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad asks her, he has the head of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein in front of him, and he has Lady Zainab and the camp of Imam al-Hussein and Imam Zain al-Abidin in chains, and they are being now dragged into the city of Kufa, a city that they had grown up in, and the people who had given their allegiance to Abu Abdullah al-Hussein just a few weeks or months ago. Now Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad thinks that he is victorious. He thinks he has been successful. He asks her, how do you see what Allah has done to you and your brother? How he has defeated you? Lady Zainab says, Ma ra'aytu illa jamila. I did not see anything but beauty on that day. And then Lady Zainab, she explains, هَؤُلَاءِ قَوْمٌ كَتَبَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقَتْلَ. You think that by killing them, you have defeated them. But they, and Allah knows, death and sacrifice and martyrdom was written and fated for them. فَبَرَزُوا إِلَى مَضَاجِعِهِمْ. And they ran and they stood up and they went towards their graves and the places wherein they fell. وَسَيَجْمَعُ اللَّهُ بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَهُمْ فَتُحَاجُّ وَتُخَاصِمُ. And Allah will combine and will gather you and them on the day of judgment. And He will prove who is the victorious. And He will assess and He will judge between you. And it is on that day, on an individual level, brothers and sisters, that Allah will set things right. Am I a person who is going to listen to the call of Allah to fulfill my responsibility, but ultimately the potential that Allah has set in my life? And then comes the historical. It comes the cosmic. On that level, Allah has promised humankind that He is going to allow light and goodness and truth to overcome evil and darkness and injustice and falsehood. That is not up to me, and that is not up to you. That is however Allah deems fit. That success on the worldly level, on the historical level, on the political and the social level, Allah will determine when He will fulfill His promise to humankind. وَنُرِيدُ أَن نَمُنَّ عَلَى الَّذِينَ اسْتُضْعِفُوا. We want and we will for those who were considered weak upon the earth. وَنَجْعَلَهُمْ أَئِمَّةً وَنَجْعَلَهُمُ الْوَارِثِينَ. And we will make them the leaders and the rulers upon the earth, and they will inherit this earth. Brothers and sisters in Iman, when on the political and on the social, on the global level, we do not have that success, that superficial success that we are expecting, we should not lose hope. Because that is not my responsibility. That is not what Allah calls me to. Allah calls me to fulfill the call that He has given me, the responsibility that He has placed in my life. I mentioned this hadith of Amirul Mu'mineen, Imam Ali alayhi salam. Yesterday we were talking about this event, and it's a khutbah number 207, 208 of Nahj al-Balagha, depending on the edition that you have, wherein Imam Ali, he goes and visits one of his companions in the city of Basra. And this companion had a large house, and Imam Ali tells him that you should use this house to bring closer the brothers and the other mu'mineen and your family members and so on. And then Imam Ali says, or rather this man complains about his brother who is a zahid and is an ascetic, doing that highest level of asceticism, separating himself from the world and doing dua and worship of Allah. Amirul Mu'mineen, when he speaks with this person, he tells him that it is not your calling, it is not your responsibility or your vocation. Allah has not told you to place the burden of your life on your family, to relinquish and forget about your responsibilities towards your family. The man, he responds to Amir al-Mu'mineen. He says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ya Imam Ali, you tell me this, even though I look at you and your life and your clothing are very ascetic, and they're very simple. Amir al-Mu'mineen was known to eat the simplest foods, to wear the simplest clothing, and to have the simplest of houses. The point is that yes, we have these different values that Islam tells us, and we have to prioritize those values so that we can live a good life. But ultimately, we prioritize those values based on the place and the position and the responsibilities that Allah has given us and has placed in our lives. The calling, the vocation that Allah has told us to fulfill. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he tells this man that you think you are going to be like me. You are not me and I am not you. Waitak. Inni lastu ka'ant. I am not like you. Inna Allah farada ala a'immatil haq. أن يقدروا أنفسهم بضعفة الناس. I have a calling, I have a responsibility, and Allah has placed me as the A'imma, as the leader in truth and in righteousness upon the believers, upon the Muslim Ummah. And in this role that I have to consider the weakest amongst the believers. كَيْ لَا يَتَبَيَّغَ بِالْفَقْرِ فَقْرُهُ. So that their faqr, their poverty, their difficulties do not overcome them and they cannot bear them. So I order my life, I see my potential not based on what I think, but rather on the responsibility that Allah has placed and the calling that Allah has given to my life. Brothers and sisters, when we look at the journey of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, this is the ultimate message, or one of the most important messages that we can draw from the journey of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein. What it means for a person to fulfill that calling, that vocation, and that responsibility that Allah has given. Again, On an individual level, I look at my calling and I fulfill that calling. Whatever conclusion Allah decides for my actions, those conclusions are not my responsibility. And this is why Abu Abdullah, whenever he would bring back the bodies of the martyrs to the camp, he would say these words of the Quran. من المؤمنين رجال in Surah Al-Ahzab. من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله عليه. There are men and people among the believers that they fulfill that oath that they have made with Allah. فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ قَضَى نَحْبَهُ وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَنْتَظِرُ وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. Some of them will have fulfilled that oath from before. They will have answered the call of Allah, and they will have given their lives. To some people that might have been a waste of a life. They might have run away to the farthest ends of the earth, and they could have lived a comfortable life. But these people are looking at that oath that they have made with Allah. فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ قَضَى نَحْبَهُ وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَنْتَظِرُ. And there are some people who want martyrdom. They want to give everything that they have. They want to sacrifice for themselves for Allah. But at the same time, Allah has not called them to do that. We sacrifice when Allah asks us to sacrifice, and we hold back, and we live comfortable lives when Allah places that upon our shoulders. وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَنْتَظِرُ. And there are amongst the believers those who will await, and those who will be patient. وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. But the principle, brothers and sisters, is that they do not swerve from their dedication and their devotion to Allah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. Let us turn towards Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. As I mentioned, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein is the ultimate. We can turn on the lights for just a few moments. Thank you. Sallu ala Muhammad. Abu Abdullah al-Hussein is the ultimate example and manifestation of that willingness to devote themselves to the calling of Allah, not concerning himself with the conclusion or the effects of what that sacrifice would mean, but ultimately thinking and concerning himself with the prophecy that Allah had given to him, the fate that Allah had placed in his life. Sometimes when we are reflecting on the journey of Abu Abdullah, a couple questions come to our mind. I'd like to just address a few of them and see how Abu Abdullah's journey corresponds, and we can learn from the journey of Imam al-Hussein, corresponds to this idea of fulfilling a person's oath, of living up to that calling. The first question that sometimes comes up, especially when we're talking to people who are outside of the school of the Ahlulbayt, is that why did Abu Abdullah al-Hussein rise up? Was it because he wanted to get the Khilafat? He wanted to acquire the power that now Yazid was claiming? Or was it that he wanted to simply sacrifice himself and maybe put himself in harm's way, or even, na'udhu billah, his own family? Or was there a higher purpose? For those who are sometimes unfamiliar with the habits and the sunan of the Ahlul Bayt, they might have thought that Imam al-Hussein, and some people even say this today, that Imam al-Hussein, he saw that the Khilafat was taken away from his father. He was killed during the time of his Khilafat. And then it was taken away from Imam al-Hassan. And Imam al-Hassan made a peace or a ceasefire deal with Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. And now when the turn came for Abu Abdullah, some people claim that now he wanted to establish his own khilafat, to go and establish his own power over the Muslims. This is one opinion. And this is an opinion that not only does it not take into account the reality and the teachings of the Ahlulbayt, but also it does not take into account the historical evidence that we have according to the words and the deeds of Imam al-Hussein. And I would like to just mention a second point, a second question that sometimes arises, and then we will reflect on the actions and the words of Abu Abdullah. The second question sometimes is that who was ultimately responsible? Na'udhu billah, was it the people, was it Imam al-Hussein? Or was it people like Yazid and Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad? In other words, did Imam al-Hussein know and understand what was at stake? Who was he up against? These are sometimes questions that come up. And again, the framework is, how does Imam al-Hussein manifest and present to the Muslim Ummah that guidance that Allah has promised for the Muslims? Brothers and sisters, this is a very basic principle in the school of the Ahlul Bayt, that Allah does not cut off His guidance to the Muslims and to humankind. And this is something that we should also take solace in, that Allah is going to connect Himself and is going to guide us throughout all different times, and we are always going to have that connection with Allah. So long as there is an Imam on this earth, then we will have that connection. We will be able to hear Allah's call, and we will be able to, inshallah, if Allah gives us the strength and the courage, to respond to that call. The first question: what was the intention of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. I'm going to ask the brothers to make a little bit of space, if we can move and fill in as much space to the left, to the right as possible, so that we can make space for the brothers entering. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. First, brothers and sisters, this is a shared point. According to various ahadith from the school of the Ahlul Bayt and other schools in Islam, that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi had prophesied and had told not only his own immediate family, he had told his wives, particular Salama, and as well Amirul Mu'mineen Imam Ali, and even Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, about what was going to come and what was going to befall Imam al-Hussein. And this is the very basic fact that we have about the history of Imam al-Hussein's journey. It does not start, in other words, with the events in the year 60 after Hijrah, but it starts many years before, even during the Prophet's lifetime. And repeatedly, Imam al-Hussein would receive these visions from the Prophet, telling him that this is going to be your path. That, oh Hussein, my own ummah is going to murder you and is going to slaughter you. And you are going to sacrifice yourself for the benefit of Islam. That is your mission. And so when we compare the mission of Imam al-Hussein with the mission of Imam al-Hassan, Imam al-Hussein was called by the Prophet of Allah Not, for example, as some people might claim, to go and grab power or to give himself some sort of pride and prestige, but rather to give his life for the cause of Allah. This is not just an empty sacrifice. This is a prophecy of the Prophet of Allah. It's that calling, that fate. Imam al-Hasan had a different pact. He had a different calling. His calling was to bring about a peace within the Muslim Ummah. And so we cannot compare, in other words, the situation and the state and the responsibility of Imam al-Hasan versus the responsibility of Imam al-Hussein. When we come closer to the events of Karbala, we see that in the year 50 after Hijrah, when Imam al-Hasan passes away, it is at this point that Muawiyah begins to try to get allegiance for his son Yazid, la'natullah alayh. A man who was known amongst the Muslim Ummah to be a person who is sinful, a person who does not care about even the superficial acts within Islam, the superficial teachings of the Prophet. And he was very famous. There was no doubt in the eyes and the minds of the Muslims. 10 years, brothers and sisters, 10 years before the events of Karbala, Muawiyah begins this path. And it is said that he goes to the different cities of the Muslim Ummah, to Medina and to Mecca, to try to get this allegiance. Up until the moment that Muawiyah dies, there were a number of people who had rejected the call of Muawiyah to give allegiance to his son Yazid. And it is at this point that Yazid sends a messenger to his governor in the city of Medina, Walid ibn Utbah, a man who was a part of the Banu Umayyah and a man who was tasked with getting allegiance from some of the most notable companions of the Prophet. Some of them, like Abdullah ibn Umar, and the son of Zubayr, Abdullah ibn Zubayr, and Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And the task was that either you get allegiance from these people, or you do what you will. In other words, this was a threat on the life of these individuals. And that is why you see that each one of these people leaves the city of Medina to take sanctuary in the city of Mecca, that Haramullah. So there's no question. And there are different stages on this path that Yazid threatens the life of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. We want to think about who is responsible. There are many individuals who are held responsible. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, these different governors, the people who turned their backs on Imam al-Hussein after having pledged their allegiance, but ultimately the buck stops with the so-called Khalifa that the Muslims were now cowering behind. And it is with this call that Imam al-Hussein as well leaves the city of Medina. Having rejected that giving of the allegiance to a person like Yazid, Imam al-Hussein leaves the city of Medina, the city that he grew up in, the city of his grandfather and of his family, in the middle of the night. We're telling the story of Nabi Musa as he leaves his own city, the land of Misr, in that fear and fright for his own life and the life of his family. And the Banu Umayyah had set a precedent that they are not going to stop at anything to get what they want. There are many examples before this, and we don't have much time, that the Banu Umayyah would kill the families and take and imprison the women and the children of anybody who would stand up against them. Companions of the Prophet of Allah, people that the Muslims recognized as upright, as righteous, and very devoted Muslims. They would not have any mercy on anyone. And so Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, he gathers his family and he leaves for the city of Mecca. And in the city of Mecca, it is said that when the army of Yazid is now starting to come towards them, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, he now says, having spent days calling the people of Mecca, calling the people, the Muslims who had come for Hajj, to his side, and to give that allegiance, because Yazid was not considered the true Khalifa at that time. And if a person like Abu Abdullah al-Hussein were to give his allegiance, then this would give legitimacy to the Khilafat of Yazid. The only thing that was standing in the way of Yazid and the Khilafat and the legitimacy in the eyes of the Muslims was Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. If you cannot even convince the family of the Prophet, then no other Muslim is going to agree with you. And then Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, now the moment comes. Again, what is the calling of Imam al-Hussein? What is Allah asking of the Imam? It is said that when the Imam assesses the situation, he sees that Yazid is even going to shed his blood and the blood of the Muslims in that sanctuary of Allah. And this is something that Imam al-Hussein does not want to be responsible for. That no Muslim's blood should be shed in the haram of Allah. And so he leaves even the city of Mecca. When those letters begin to pour in to Imam al-Hussein, he sees that the city of Kufa and the people of that city, they are proclaiming their allegiance for Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And this is not as though Imam al-Hussein now wants to establish his khilafat, but Allah is telling and is showing that now Imam al-Hussein has no excuse. That now he has to continue that journey to the city of Kufa. This is an example that we have from Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali's own life. Amir al-Mu'mineen, when the Khilafat was taken away from him, he did not vie for that Khilafah, and he said, this power and this authority over you Muslims, it is worth less to me than the most worthless thing that you could possibly think of. It's worth less to me than the sandals on my feet. Someone comes and asks the Imam, "Oh, Amir al-Mu'mineen, why are you fixing your sandals?" He says, "These sandals are more important to me than the greatest authority in this world." And Abu Abdullah was trained in that family. He had the same vision and the same sight as Amir al-Mu'mineen. So to think that Imam al-Hussein was going to, na'udhu billah, be fooled by the claims of allegiance of a people like Kufa, people he grew up in, this is also being entirely unfair and closing our eyes to the reality of the journey of Imam al-Hussein. And so when people come, Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Umar, many of the different companions of the Prophet, they come and tell Imam al-Hussein, "Oh Abu Abdullah, you know who these people are. You know these people of Kufa are just going to turn their backs on you." Imam al-Hussein, he does not disagree, but he says, "This is my task. The Prophet of Allah told me that I have to fulfill this mission." In one of those instances, he says this to his brother Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah. We want to understand the purpose and the mission of Imam al-Hussein. This is one good example. He tells him, "I am not standing up neither for my own pride nor out of some sort of power or desire. But rather I am standing up to establish the sunnah and the tradition of my grandfather, Rasulullah, and my father, Amir al-Mu'mineen, وَآمُرَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, and to enjoin the Muslims towards goodness and righteousness, and to forbid them from evil. In other words, if it comes down to it, I will sacrifice my own life. If it comes down to it, I will willingly give my life, so that the Muslims understand that giving your life for the sake of Allah is not defeat. Giving your life for the sake of Allah, in fact, can rid the Muslims of the fear that grips them and that shackles them. The fear that the people of Kufa, that forced them to turn their backs on Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. He says in another instance, when he is called to give bay'ah once again, he says, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Wa ala al-islami as-salam. Indeed, we are from Allah, and to Allah we return. And as-salam, farewell to Islam. إِذْ قَدْ بُلِيَتْ الْأُمَّةُ بِرَاعٍ مِثْلِ يَزِيدٍ. Because a person like Yazid should not have the legitimacy to rule over the Muslim Ummah. And how terrible a fate has befallen the Muslim Ummah, that their eyes are blind and their hearts have been hardened. And they are allowing a person like Yazid to become their ruler and the model that they are going to set for themselves. And then the Imam says, in response to some of these people who are telling him, don't shed your life or shed your blood for no reason. He tells them that I have been told by the Prophet of Allah that the Banu Umayyah and a person like Yazid does not have the right to have the legitimacy to rule over the Muslim Ummah. The Khilafat cannot be in their hands. And so he continues his path. And time after time, station after station on that path to Karbala, brothers and sisters, it is said that whenever individuals would come in the path of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, he would on one instance tell them about his own mission. I have mentioned individuals like Zuhair ibn Qayn, and then who accepted the mission and the message of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, but also individuals who rejected that call. A man by the name of Abdullah ibn al-Hur al-Ju'fi. He rejects the call of Imam al-Hussein. But the Imam, instead of forsaking Abu Abdullah ibn al-Hur, he tells him, if you don't want to commit yourself to my path, then at least get yourself as far away from Kufa and the place of Karbala, so that if my call comes to you and you do not heed that call, then Allah will not damn you and curse you like He does the enemies who are going to fight against us. In other words, Imam al-Hussein understood his path. And every single moment in that path, he was trying to guide the Muslims. And he was trying to set them on the right path. When he gets to the lands of Karbala, when even his own enemies, Hur ibn Yazid, when he comes, Hur recognizes who Abu Abdullah is. And it is said that even the army of Hur, when the time comes for Salat, the army of Hur, 1,000 men strong, they pray behind Imam al-Hussein. They recognized who the Imam was. But they understood that it is either their position in power their position and authority, the call and the mission that Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad gave them, or the call of Allah? And they chose the call of Ubaydullah, of Ibn Ziyad. On the one hand, they pray behind Imam al-Hussein, recognizing his righteousness. On the other hand, in just a few days, they come and they slaughter Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And then comes the moment when Imam al-Hussein, at different stations on his path to Karbala and in those plains, it is said that Imam al-Hussein, we think about what the mission of Abu Abdullah is. He continuously tells them that, oh, my brothers, and oh, my family members, and oh, my companions, they only want to attack me. And their only aim and their only goal is to shed my blood. And so take the hands of my family members and take the hands of your own family members and go off into the night. I am not going to hold anything over your heads. My allegiance has been removed from you. You can do as you want and as you wish. This is not the words of a man who is looking for power, nor a man who is looking for authority or of respect of the individuals in his life, but he is only looking to fulfill that call of Allah and of the Prophet. And it is even said on the day of Ashura, Imam al-Hussein calls the enemy soldiers and he tells them, do you know who you are attacking? Allow me to go into the farthest ends of the earth. I will not harm you, and you do not harm me. Give me the peace, and let me go out into Yemen and into some other land. I will not threaten you. But the enemy soldiers, every single message that they heard, every single call of Imam al-Hussein, when they didn't heed that call, their hearts became ever more hardened. Their ears became deaf, and their eyes became blind. And it is said that with every call of Abu Abdullah, they would begin to turn their back even more. Tonight is the night of Ashura. Brothers and sisters in Iman, tonight is not a night that we need to say any musibah. The musibah is in the hearts of every believer. Let us take ourselves to the plains of Karbala and into those camps of Imam al-Hussein and of Lady Zainab. Let us imagine what was going through the hearts and the minds of the camp of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. It is said in the books of history that the day of Tasu'ah was supposed to be the day when the battle was supposed to begin. And you can imagine how long that battle must have been. 72 or 73 men in the face of thousands upon thousands. It was supposed to be a very quick battle. But Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, he asks his brother Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas to ask these vile men, give us one more day. We want to spend this day worshipping Allah and reading His Quran. We want to spend this day speaking to one another and being in the company of each other. It is said that Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, he fulfills that wish of Imam al-Hussein and he goes and asks the enemy camp. And they grant the camp of Imam al-Hussein one more night. And it is said that they spent this entire night in worship and in the ibadah of Allah. Some of them were reciting the Quran. Others of them were giving each other glad tidings. It is said that on a night like this, one of the companions, Burayd, he is smiling and his companion comes and asks him, "Oh Burayd, why do you smile? Do you not know what is going to befall us on the morrow?" It is said that he responds I know what will happen. And I am so joyous in my heart that I have been given this opportunity to sacrifice myself for a man like Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And so I go towards my death. مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ رِجَالٌ. There are people amongst the mu'mineen who go towards their death with joy and with comfort. It is said that on a night like this, Imam al-Hussein gathers his companions and he tells them to turn off the lights. Bring darkness to this camp. Let each one of you take the hand of his brother and of his family and go out into the night. Do not think that you have any responsibility towards me. Save yourself, because they are simply after me. Save yourself and your own family members. And it is said that each one of the companions, he would stand up and he would pledge his allegiance once again to Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And they would say, Ya Abu Abdullah, if tomorrow we are killed, and if our bodies are burned, and if the dust of our bodies is scattered into the wind, and then if Allah brings us once again back to this world so that we can give our lives in your path, and this is repeated 1,000 times, then, oh Abu Abdullah, we will give our lives for you 1,000 times over. And each one of them is giving his allegiance once again. It is Qasim and Aliyun Akbar. It is Zuhair and Habib. It is Muslim and Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. They tell Abu Abdullah that we are not going to leave your side. But there is also an infant son who is pledging his allegiance to Abu Abdullah. A young son, a young infant who could not even speak. And it is said his mouth was so dry that he would not even cry anymore. For 3 days, the water had been cut off from the camp of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And so even the infant son of Imam al-Hussein, he had gone silent. Brothers and sisters, it is said that on the next day, one after another, Imam al-Hussein sees his companions go and give their lives, and their bodies are torn to pieces in front of the Imam, and they fall upon the ground, and they give their final breath. And then Ali al-Akbar, he goes and he gives his life. Qasim, Aoun and Muhammad, and then finally Abbas. And then it is said, when Imam al-Hussein looks at his camp, he calls and he looks that there is no one left. And then he turns towards the plains and he says, هل من ناصر ينصرني هل من ضاب يضب عن حرم رسول الله. Is there anyone who will come and help me? Is there anyone who will defend the camp and the haram of the Prophet of Allah? It is said that at that moment, Imam al-Hussein now goes back to the camp. He wants to say his final farewell to Lady Zainab, to Layla, to Sukaina, and to finally his young son, Abdullah al-Saghir, Ali al-Asghar. He asks his sister, Zainab, ma walini walami al-Saghir. Oh, my sister Zainab, give me my infant son. There are different reports and maybe different reasons why did Imam al-Hussein not ask the mother of Abdullah al-Rabi' of Ali al-Asghar. Maybe it is because he did not want to see the eyes, look into the eyes of the mother of Ali al-Asghar. And maybe it is because the infant son of Ali, of Imam al-Hussein, was in such a terrible state that his mother could not bear looking upon his dried lips anymore. And so the women folk would pass this young body between themselves. And so Imam al-Hussein, he asks his sister Zainab, "Nawalini waladi as-saghir hatta uqta," so that I can say my final farewell to my young son. And he gets and he embraces his son. There are different reports, brothers and sisters. In one report, it is said that as soon as Imam al-Hussein takes the body of Ali al-Asghar into his arms, and he brings his lips close to the dried lips of Ali al-Asghar, that an arrow is shot, and it strikes the face and the throat of Ali. In another report, brothers and sisters, it is said that Imam al-Hussein brings this young body underneath his cloak, and he brings them towards the enemy soldiers. Brothers and sisters, at different moments, I mentioned, at different moments during this path, Imam al-Hussein tries to open the eyes and the hearts of the enemy soldiers. And this is one of those moments. It is said that Imam al-Hussein brings the young body of Ali al-Asghar towards the enemy lines, and he holds him up. It is said that the enemy soldiers, they might have thought that Hussein is bringing the Quran to now surrender. But then when Hussein pulls his cloak from the body of Ali al-Asghar, and he holds Ali al-Asghar up high, he says, "If you are not going to have any mercy upon me, nor upon my camp, then take this young son of mine and feed him and give him some water to drink." You look at his body, you look at how dry his body has become, you look at how silent he is. It is said that Ali would open his mouth and he would close it. He would take a little bit of breath. The enemy soldiers, they don't know what to do. There is a commotion and a noise in the enemy soldiers. They're asking themselves, if we're not going to have mercy on Hussein, then at least we can have mercy on this young son of his. And it is said that Shimr and the leaders of the enemy soldiers, they see their soldiers falling apart, their confidence being taken from them. And it is said that they order Harmala to cast your arrow and respond to the call of Hussein. Give Ali what he is looking for. And it is said the arrow is cast and it strikes the throat of Ali al-Asghar. And it is said in the books of history that the throat of Ali ضُبِحَ مِنَ الْأُذُنِ إِلَى الْأُذُنِ. The body of Ali cannot take an arrow. And it is said when it strikes his throat is cut from one ear to the other. It is dangling from the and the blood of Ali is pooling upon the hands. The poet says, بخواب ای کودک خاموش من قطع می شود آغوش من مخفی از چشم زنان ای دلبرم می کرم قبر تو را به دست خویش. Oh my young son, sleep now. Now is the time of your rest. Now is the time that you can sleep. I am not going to take you back to the camp. It is said that Imam al-Hussein, he did not know which way to turn. Should he go back and give this young body to his mother? What would she think and what would she say? And so he paces back and forth. The heart of Imam al-Hussein is broken in this moment, brothers and sisters. Ajarakumullah. It is said, it is at this moment, no other moments did even was there a call from the heavens, but at this moment even Allah is giving His consolation to Hussein. He says, a cry call comes from the heavens. Oh Hussein, Wa Hussein, leave the body of Ali where you find him, because we will give him a nurse in the heavens. And it is said that Hussein, he digs a very shallow grave for his young Ali, and he places the body of Ali in that shallow grave. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنقَلِبُونَ.